counteroffensive seem to have started, or maybe not. We're hearing conflicting messages, and obviously the news of the week is the explosion on the Kakhovka Dam. So I wanted to first start with your thoughts on what we know at this point about the counteroffensive, and how you think it is related or not related to what happened in Kakhovka just now.
Sure. Well, the Russian Ministry of Defense and military bloggers, Russian military bloggers, have been reporting several, let's call them incursions or attacks, all along the line of contact between Russian forces and Ukrainian forces over the last 3 to 5 days. And these would be what people call shaping attacks or shaping operations. They're operations for the Ukrainians to probe the line and see where weak spots might be in the Russian defenses. Also, they attempt to do this all along the line so that their exact area of penetration where they want to launch the main offensive is not revealed until they're ready to do that. And I think that's what we're seeing in the news and in the reports. The dam break at Kakhovka, if at the moment there are 3 versions of responsibility floating around. Ukraine and the West, including the United States, blame Russia. Russia blames Ukraine. And then there are a very few people who are saying that maybe this was an accident. Maybe there was some sort of damage to the bridge and that it happened just coincidentally. If this were not at the beginning of the so-called counteroffensive, I might buy that third explanation that it was an accident or give it more credence. But as the Russians say, there's no such thing as a coincidence, and this is too much of a coincidence at the timing of it. So I think somebody caused the dam to break. And this is connected to the upcoming offensive.
So, Kevin, there are different schools of thoughts right now about who militarily benefited from the dam being broken. Some people are saying that this is actually disrupting the supply of water to Crimea, and Russia would have no way to benefit from that. At the same time, Ukrainian authorities are saying that it's definitely Moscow who created this before the announced or maybe undergoing counteroffensive of the Ukrainian forces. Can we analyze a little bit from the military standpoint as to who could have benefited more from what's happening now?
Well, I think you're right that there's both sides benefit, or both sides have the same kinds of complications and problems that result from this dam breaking. So it's difficult to use that as a measure for determining who might have done it. In this particular case, whoever did it, I think that Russia will benefit more. Despite the fact that they lose a major source of good drinking water from the north, Russia has survived in Crimea, occupying Crimea without this canal working for several years after the 2014 invasion. So they have experience of doing that. And Russia is the one that is creating defensives in the Kherson and Zaporizhia districts to thwart an attack. Ukraine benefits not very much at all from this flood. Perhaps they might be flooding, the flood might affect some of the defenses that are closer to the river and in the floodplain. Perhaps there might be some movement of Russian troops that's prohibited by the flooding. But other than that, I don't see how Ukraine benefits from this.
Kevin, do we understand something about anything, for that matter, about the geography of the counteroffensive? Because initially it was said this, massive push in the south. Now we're just getting isolated reports about new skirmishes around Bakhmut. Despite the fact that Bakhmut has been widely admitted not having any strategic importance for the fight and just having mainly the symbolic importance. No details so far have been revealed as to the plans of Kyiv on how to carry out this counteroffensive. Do we understand anything from the moves so far on the ground?
Well, I think that the common thought was that this attack would start in the south, or at least in the southeastern part of this land bridge from Russia to Crimea. And the reason for that would be that it would be harder for Russia to support and get troops and equipment down to that area. So Ukraine would have an advantage logistically. It would pose an almost immediate threat to Crimea and its security if they had success. So I still think that we're looking at an attack in the southeastern part. Now, having said that, that could be way down below Kherson and along the very furthest tips of the Kherson province, or it could be more towards Zaporizhia, perhaps along the border between Zaporizhia and Kherson, and moving into a town called Melitopol. The disadvantage of the second one is that the Ukrainians would immediately have Russians on both sides of them if they were to create a penetration there. The one in the south, it's not really conducive terrain to, especially if the river has flooded, to launching an attack down there. So, there are pluses and minuses. I don't think many people believe there's a main offensive coming in the north or in the east. There could be, and that could be a surprise for everybody, but I don't see how that helps Ukraine as much as the other attack would.
Kevin, we're hearing from the Ukrainian authorities, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the White House here in Washington, that enough arms and equipment have been supplied to Kyiv for this counteroffensive to be carried out successfully. Do we understand what the definition of success in this case is?
No, we don't understand the definition of success just yet. Both sides today could claim an amount of success in this war. Russia has taken a lot of land and created this land bridge. Ukraine has prevented the destruction of their country and retained the independence of their government and rolled back large sections of Russian advances in the north. So who could claim victory? We don't know today. And who will stop and claim victory in the next 6 months? We really don't know. I do think that Russian President Putin has made it clear that at a minimum he wants what he has taken, and he will call it a defeat or not be able to call it a victory if he loses Kherson province or Zaporizhia or the access to the Crimean Peninsula. So in that regard, there is a goal, say, for the Ukrainians in the near term. If they can do any of that, then they will have taken a victory away from Russia. And Russia, on the other side of that coin, if they can prevent Ukraine from gaining any significant territory in this offensive this summer and fall, then they will have basically shut the door on future Ukrainian operations.
If we're talking about strictly equipment and the supplies that Kyiv has been getting so far, what's your assessment, Kevin? Because we're at the point when the talk of F-16 is happening, something that we couldn't fathom several months ago. What is your assessment now?
So I think that the attitude, the policy of the West toward arming Ukraine has evolved over the course of the war. And given the unprecedented nature of the war, the intensity of the war, the fact that it even began, I think that we have to allow that some of the governments and administrations and political leaders had to feel their way through this over the last 12 months, just as Ukraine and Russia have had to deal with totally unexpected conditions in the war. So I don't throw too many stones at the West for starting out with small and meager numbers and shorter range weapons, and then ending up after a year finally agreeing to provide the aircraft and longer range weapons that Ukraine has been asking for. But certainly we're at that point now where we're doing that, and we need to do that. We need to continue doing it.
When we talked about F-16s last time, we discussed the length of the training, and you mentioned that it could take up to 3 years to train the pilots, but if they're experienced pilots, it could go down to 1 year. Just looking at the time frame, just the fact that such heavy concentration, such heavy focus is put on F-16s right now, can we just make a conclusion that this is the plan for a protracted longer military campaign?
Well, certainly the F-16s are in case of need in the future, right? And if the war is still going on, then that will be a benefit to Ukraine. They also help Ukraine make the shift from Soviet and Russian legacy weapons to NATO weapon systems. And this is important now, but it's also important in the future that when the Ukrainian military picks up the phone and asks for a repair part or for help with a weapon, they're not calling to the East, they're calling to the West. And as much as we can make that happen, that's good for Ukraine, it's good for NATO.
Kevin, talking about the bigger picture, we just heard from the U.S. Minister of Defense at the beginning of the week, and he warned that there is no certainty during wars and that things can be unfolding in all kinds of unpredictable ways. He also said that the allies understand the uncertainty and should be prepared to be supporting Ukraine much longer than anybody ever expected. This is a quote from Austin. Is this the way to manage expectations in the light of the upcoming or maybe undergoing offensive? And how do we read that statement?
Well, I think Secretary of Defense Austin is managing expectations to a degree. Yes, he is making sure that allies and the people in the United States understand that this is not going to be over with a victory parade in September, whatever happens. It's the West is not unified necessarily in its support of Ukraine. There are factions which want to reduce or even stop some of the support. The West is overwhelmingly, in the majority, is pro-Ukrainian support. And I think this is who Austin is talking to. He's saying, hang in there, do not be swayed by those voices that say we can't afford this or that we have to stop this support. And he and others in the administration and those in NATO who are speaking like him are saying that we will be with Ukraine for as long as it takes. This is finally a message to Putin and to the Russians who are in his leadership circle that they cannot outlast us, or tire us out.
Kevin, talking about the events on the ground, we witnessed the incursion attacks on Belgorod district in Russia, and now in Belgium, as the press reports, They're investigating the use of Belgium-supplied military assistance in these attacks. And then we also heard from the U.S. press and independent investigators and fact checkers here that some U.S. military equipment was used during the incursion attack on Belgorod area. How do you feel about this whole paradigm of not allowing, the Western arms to be used on the attacks on Russia? We also saw the drones, and we do hear the confirmations from the White House that it's still very much that Kyiv is still very much being discouraged by Washington to use the long-range arms and all kinds of arms on the attacks on the Russian territory. Do you feel it's changing? Do you feel Kyiv is not necessarily listening to that? Is it going to be kind of shaping up in a different ways in the months to come, this whole thinking?
Well, the policy of the West and the United States for not using American arms or Western or NATO arms to make attacks inside of Russia was obviously an attempt to prevent Russia or Putin from claiming that NATO was attacking Russia and using that as a pretext for a larger war against NATO or against NATO countries, or resorting to nuclear weapons against NATO countries. In any war, there are going to be mistakes. There are going to be transgressions. I don't know if Ukraine is deliberately supplying these kinds of weapons to these so-called independent or private military groups which are launching into Russia, or if they just are not able to control the flow of all of the equipment that's moving around the country and into the battlefield. In either case, it does present a greater risk. But I don't think it's at the level that could give the Russians a reason to claim that NATO is attacking Russia. But going forward, it will continue to be part of our policy, I think, at least up through and to a ceasefire and an ending of the current fighting. And then when we get into negotiations, when Ukraine negotiates its status at the end of all of that, whatever that is, I think the West and the United States and Ukraine together need to think about, well, what kinds of weapons are we going to give you, and how can you use them?
Kevin, again, talking about the coordination, we have breaking news in Washington Post reports that CIA actually had information about the planned attack of some Ukrainian elements on the Nord Stream 2. And it just basically, the reporting says that CIA was warned by some other allies and their intelligence about these plans. Just again, circling back to the level of coordination, the level of understanding of what Kyiv is intending to do, or what are the Ukrainian elements, probably not officially, related to the authorities of Ukraine, intend to do. Do you feel that Washington has a good grip on that?
Well, I think the United States has shown that it has good intelligence about what all the sides are doing and thinking in this war. The United States was leaking out information about the upcoming invasion even before it happened, trying to ward off or warn off Putin from doing anything and to prepare the allies. In terms of this particular intelligence, knowing or even suspecting that the Ukrainians might be involved in that, I'm not sure what the thinking was and how it was released, or how, I don't know, perhaps it's been leaked now that the U.S. knew that. I'm not sure exactly how it got out, but if that's true, that the United States knew that, well, that would just be a sign of another aspect of the intelligence effort that was going on all around this war to gather as much info as possible. The fact that Ukraine might have, or the idea that Ukraine might have blown up this Nord Stream pipeline, that's something for the administration and Ukraine and the Western countries to address now and to think how they might react to that.
Kevin, and the backdrop of everything that is going on, we're still hearing about readiness in the White House to return to the discussions to the arms control treaties and conditions. And Kremlin also said that they would be ready to do that. That's after everything, pretty much every arms control measure has been wiped out in the past few weeks, few months. Do you think that it's even possible for Washington and Moscow to come back or to renew negotiations on this important matter, considering the level of tensions and what's going on in Ukraine right now?
Yeah, I do think it's possible for the United States and Russia to resume negotiations on strategic arms, nuclear arms, even conventional arms at the strategic level, let's say. It's possible, it's necessary that we do that. I don't think it's going to happen in the near future. I do not think it's going to happen necessarily while Russia and Ukraine are still fighting, while soldiers are still killing each other on the battlefield. While there have been reports that the United States is interested in making sure that we obey or adhere to existing treaties, I don't think it's really gone to the length of talking about renewing expired treaties or addressing weapons that through treaties that haven't been addressed before. And it was interesting that Secretary Blinken said recently that there would be no ceasefire in Ukraine until Russian forces had withdrawn from the territory of Ukraine, including Crimea. Or actually, I guess he said back to the maybe to the lines that existed in 2015. But in any case, that doesn't seem to me that the United States is really looking for an expansive dialogue with Russia. We're still holding a very tough line about what we're willing to talk to Russia about.
Kevin, are there any risks of Washington and Moscow not being involved in these talks in the nearest future, or it is something that can be postponed until better times?
You mean talks about
the strategic arms control?
Yeah. Well, I think that we should not expect substantive talks about strategic arms control between the United States and Russia until, I would say, until at a minimum, the fighting stops, until we get some sort of ceasefire, whether it's under the conditions that Secretary Blinken mentioned or under the conditions that Ukraine agrees to. As long as the active fighting is going on, I don't think we're going to have serious negotiations about strategic arms.
Kevin, you mentioned NATO briefly and how it could benefit from Ukraine being trained for F-16s and other military equipment, Western produced. And just the other week, there was a discussion at the NATO ministerial about the future of Ukraine in NATO. And as far as we understand, there is still a very big splits on whether Ukraine should be joining, and even from the Baltic states, we're hearing that while the war is while the war is continuing, there should be no expectation of Ukraine's membership at NATO. What do you foresee in these terms? And would it be kind of beneficial for Russia then to protract this war indefinitely, just to not see Ukraine becoming the NATO's member?
Yeah. Well, people have been looking at Sun Tzu and Clausewitz to find quotes about this war that might reveal some timeless rules and things that adhere to these countries. One of them that was recently brought up again by Sun Tzu was that no nation benefits from a long war. Russia, I don't think, benefits from a war extending indefinitely, although certainly they have benefited from frozen conflicts in its near abroad. But in this case, this is a much higher intensity war and situation. Ukraine has shown that it's not going to just sit back and accept a ceasefire from Russia unilaterally. So let me see where I was.
So there was NATO, and we can this part we can cut out.
Okay. So I'm just trying to remember. The question was about. Oh, okay, NATO membership. So up until recently, the West had a very ambiguous stand on Ukrainian membership in NATO, at least in the near term. They said in the long term, it's our goal, but in the near term, things are not ready. I know when the war started, there were certainly a lot of people who said, so this is an example of why we have to delay or wait for any NATO membership for Ukraine. But it was interesting that one of the people who are most respected in international affairs, Henry Kissinger, has recently been saying that perhaps NATO membership for Ukraine should be moved up. Maybe it's something that's more near term for us and better for NATO if we do it in the near term. And I think Henry Kissinger has the right idea. Ukraine has proven that its military is certainly one of the best in Europe, bar none. And it would not be a drag on NATO for Ukraine's military to be part of the NATO forces. There is some risk, of course, with moving too fast with NATO, and that is that Russia would escalate its war against Ukraine or expand its war beyond Ukraine to NATO countries. And this would have to be managed very carefully and considered as we move toward NATO membership for Ukraine. But if you ask me what is the consensus out there, I think it's to go slow on the NATO membership. If you ask me what does Kevin Ryan think we should do, I think we should move it up a little bit. I think this gives gives Ukraine some motivation to correct other problems like corruption and so on. It gives NATO the advantage that Ukraine would bring to it, and it makes Russia see that its efforts are wrong-headed and they will not gain any success against NATO or Ukraine.
Kevin, one very last question. Just it's kind of local to Russia, but it's brought to this war as we've been watching the drone attacks on Moscow at this point, on in the most prestigious parts of Moscow, and we just discussed it last week. Do you think that this tactic will continue, and do you think that Russian territory would be getting more of this? And is this unnerving the Russian leadership at all? Because we saw the response from Vladimir Putin; it was pretty muted, some strong words, but he was kind of relaxed talking about it. What was your take on this?
So I think that the drone attacks in Moscow are extremely unnerving to the Russian leadership. And I believe that they are representative of the fact that within Russia, there are a lot of threats to the regime, a lot of threats to Putin. I still don't know myself who launched these drone attacks. I'm willing to accept that Ukraine did it if they want to claim responsibility, but they haven't in most cases. You have left-wing groups in Russia who have talked about doing this. There was a left-wing Russian Ponomaryov, who recently suggested or said on CNN that he was part of a group that launched those attacks. At the same time, you have right-wing groups who think Putin is not doing enough in the war. And their complaints and criticism could be morphing into actual opposition against Putin. And Putin is faced with all these threats. He's faced with the threat he believes is coming from the West. He's in a fight with Ukraine, and he has domestic instability at home. So I think the leadership is very unnerved by these.